Fellas, it's a bit of a weird one this week. So Bashi just pulled out against Tatsuro Taira, and now Hyun Sung Park has stepped in on short notice to take on Tatsuro Taira in this card. Now, I've heard a lot of things about this card online. I've got two kind of contrasting opinions on this card. On one hand, it's the worst card on paper of 2025. I mean, having Hyun Sung Park in the main event says everything about it, and it's in the Apex, but I think if you're a hardcore fan, this is the best Apex card of 2025 in the sense there's, I think, there's a shit ton of fights, and there are some fights on this card that shouldn't be in an Apex, so I've got mixed opinions. We're going to be breaking down every fighter in this card. Starting off with Bashi versus Yannis. If you're wondering why Yannis looks like this, I'm going to be honest, I've only heard about this fight for about 15 minutes prior to recording this, so I haven't got the best breakdown of Yannis. But Bashi had a massive undefeated run in the regional scene, becoming a champion, came over and got a finish on the contender series, and was quite a big prospect in the division, and lost to Christian Rodriguez by decision in his debut, as he takes on Yannis, who had a decent career on the contender series, on the regional scene, and became a champion as he steps in on short notice against Bashi. Now, the style of Bashi, he's a pressure-heavy wrestler looking to take you down and smash you. That's kind of his thing. He wants to get you against the cage. He's got really good pressure, and he wants to take you down and smash you to pieces, whether it be via ground and pound or if he wants to look for a submission. He wants to take you down. He doesn't really have amazing striking as its base, but he mixes it well with the takedowns. He does a good job at mixing wrestling with the takedowns, but his pure striking isn't the best. And for Yannis, I'm going to be honest, I don't know. Like I said, I've known about this fight for about 15 minutes. I've only heard about Yannis for 15 minutes, so I have absolutely no idea about how he fights, but I'm going to go out there and assume that Bashi wins this one by submission. Yeah, like I said, Bashi was one of the better prospects coming into 2025. He obviously lost to C-Rod, which is quite a tough guy to debut against. And there were times in that fight where he was able to take down C-Rod as well, and he has got good wrestling. If you look at him on the regional scene and on the contender series, I'm still kind of bought on the hype of Bashi. Seems like he's got a lot of potential, great wrestler, and I just assume that this Yannis fella coming on short notice, on less than a week's notice, I assume Bashi's going to do Bashi things, takes him down, finds a submission or some sort of ground and pound finish in the first round. I'm going to go Bashi to get this one done in the first round, and he's had a full training camp. He was preparing for Francis Marshall. Francis Marshall pulled out. In comes Yannis. I think Bashi gets this one done by first round finish. Then we have Piera Rodriguez versus Kelten Souza. Piera Rodriguez had an undefeated on the regional scene, becoming a champion in LFA. Wins on the contender series, and since then she's gone 3-2 in the UFC with 2 losses. One of them being a submission loss to Jillian Robertson, and one of them being a DQ as she illegally headbutted a fight that she was winning. Going to be taking on Kelten Souza, who had quite a big run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Ends up getting submitted by Silva in a UFC debut, and since then she's gone 2-1, losing her most recent fight, but she also got a real good finish over Yasmin Uregi at UFC 306. The style of Piera Rodriguez, she looks to wrestle and stays busy with the ground and pound. She's quite a busy, active grappler, is Piera Rodriguez, and on the feet she's actually quite entertaining. She's got a bit of a scrappy style standing, likes to scrap, not really any danger on the feet, hasn't really got any KO ability, but she does look to scrap. And for Kelten Souza, she's a pressure heavy volume striker who throws down. She wants to throw down high volume on the feet, always on your face. Isn't the most technical, but she does throw with intent. Again, it's not really too hard to clip her. She's not the most technical striker, but she kind of throws with intent on the feet. I'm going to go with Piera Rodriguez to win this one by decision. I think Piera Rodriguez is quite talented. Like I said, her only real loss in the UFC, I think, should be to Jillian Robertson. She was dominating that fight with Cornolle until she just decided to get the headbutt and ended up getting DQ'd. And apart from that, she's been running through people. She has some decent wins in the UFC. The win over Sam Hughes is aging quite well. And for Kelten Souza, I feel like she's talented, but again, it's not like she's been beating the highest level fighters. To be fair, she lost to Angela Hill. I guess she's probably one of the better, journeymen in the... Not journeyman, I don't know how to... One of the better veterans in women MMA. Got submitted by Silva, but I feel like Piera Rodriguez is going to get go with the grappling. I see Piera Rodriguez taking Kelten Souza down, controlling her across 15 minutes, keeping the fight on the ground. I'm going to go Piera Rodriguez by decision. Rafael Estevam versus Felipe Bunes. Now, Rafael Estevam had a big undefeated run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Gets a good finish on the contender series, and so far has a win over Charles Johnson, and won his most recent fight against Jesus Aguilar, going 2-0 in the UFC, as he takes on Felipe Bunes, who had a big run in the regional scene, losing quite a few times. Also losing to Formiga as well, who's obviously formerly in the UFC, becoming a champion on the regional scene. Ends up losing to Joshua Van by finish in his UFC debut, but just picked up a finish over Jose Johnson by submission in his most recent fight in the UFC. The style of Rafael Estevam, he's a very, very dominant grappler. He's great at finding positions, he's great at scrambling, but he always ends up gassing out. He's one of the best first round grapplers, I think, in this division. The problem is his gas tank. He can't really keep that pace across a full 15 minutes, and he kind of relies too much on control. He doesn't really take any risks. He doesn't really put himself in any bad positions. He kind of just relies on riding out and getting a win by decision. He's a bit of a control grappler. And for Felipe Bunes, he's a grappler who does well at latching up submissions. He's got really good submission ability. He kind of starts off well, similar to Estevam. He kind of starts off quite well, but when the fight starts heating up and when the fight progresses, he kind of slows down. So they've both got a very similar style, grappling heavy approach. They do well early on, but as the fight progresses, they can tend to do worse. I'm going to go Rafael Estevam to win this one by decision. I think Estevam's one of the better unranked fighters at 125. If there was like a top 20 ranking in this division, he'd definitely be in it. And he has got really good wrestling. I think he's the better grappler out of the two of them. I think when it comes to submission ability, that's where I'd favour Felipe Bunes. But I think Rafael Estevam is going to control grapple for the first 15 minutes, sorry, for the first 2 rounds of this fight. Get the first 2 rounds in the bag. And again, with Felipe Bunes, I don't really see him getting a submission over Rafael Estevam. I think Estevam's the better grappler. And it isn't like Felipe Bunes particularly does better as the fight progresses, like I said. So I see it being a bit of a sloppy last round between the two of them where they're both kind of gassed out. They both can't really take the heat anymore, but I'm going to go Rafael Estevam to win a decision. He's the better grappler. Felipe Bunes, he submitted Jose Johnson, but Johnson was never built for 125. I'm going to go Rafael Estevam to win this one by decision. And maybe after this, we'll see Rafael Estevam get a shot at the top 15 because 2 wins in the UFC, one of them being over Charles Johnson, 13-0. I think he's kind of earned that spot at the top 15 next, but I'm going to pick him to win this one by decision. Then we've got Nick Klein versus Andrey Pulayev. Nick Klein had a decent run in the regional scene, getting a good finish on the contender series, then got destroyed by Mansour Abdul-Malik in his UFC debut as he takes on Andrey Pulayev, who also had a decent run in the regional scene, wins on the contender series, and lost to Christian Leroy Duncan at UFC London early this year in his UFC debut. The style of Nick Klein, he's a submission grappler. He wants to take you down and find the submission, take the back. It's pretty simple. He's quite awkward on the feet, but it actually kind of works. Like, he's got a bit of an untechnical, unorthodox style on the feet, but he was able to land a really good spinning back fist against Mansour Abdul-Malik. So he was a bit of a weird / kind of crafty striker. Andrey Pulayev, he's a bit of a rangy kickboxer with very low output, but he does well when he does get in the flow of things. You know, when the fight progresses, once he's found his range, that's kind of where he tends to do well, but he's a bit of a rangy kickboxer, doesn't really do well with low output. He doesn't really do well on the clinch as well. He got absolutely destroyed in the clinch. I don't want to say absolutely destroyed, but he got smothered in the clinch by Christian Leroy Duncan. And when it comes to grappling, I don't really favour Andrey Pulayev that much, which is why I'm going to go with Nick Klein to win this one by decision. I still don't really know how I feel about Nick Klein. He looks really good on the regional scene. He got a good finish on the contender series. And again, he didn't look too bad against Mansour Abdul-Malik. Mansour Abdul-Malik obviously inevitably got the finish, but he was able to land some shots against Abdul-Malik, wobbled him a few times. So I think on the feet, he's able to hang with Andrey Pulayev. And if anything, I can see him being the more dangerous guy on the feet. I think when it comes to a technical perspective, Pulayev's probably the more technical fighter overall, but his grappling still hasn't really shown to be amazing. He was able to defend a few takedowns from Christian Leroy Duncan, but he got smothered against the cage shot. I think we're going to see a bit of a back and forth between the striking and grappling from Nick Klein. I see him try to take the fight to the mat against Pulayev, having some success, keeping him on the ground for a couple of rounds, eventually mixing it up with the striking, landing something crafty. So I'm going to go Nick Klein to win this one by decision. They've had very similar careers, decent regional runs, wins on the contender series, then loses in a UFC debut, but I'm more, I guess, impressed by Nick Klein than I am with Andrey Pulayev. He looked very, very hesitant in that debut against Christian Leroy Duncan. He was always on the back foot, didn't really throw anything back to Pulayev. So I'm going to go with Nick Klein to win this one by decision. Then we have Rodolfo Vieira versus Tresean Gore. Now, Rodolfo Vieira has a huge background in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's actually one of the best BJJ grapplers in the UFC right now. Had a huge background in BJJ. Goes undefeated on the regional scene with a 100% finishing rate, obviously all via grappling. Goes 2-0 in his first 2 wins in the UFC, obviously both by submission. And then he takes on Anthony Hernandez. He gets submitted by Anthony Hernandez in one of the biggest underdog losses, one of the biggest underdog performances of modern history as Hernandez got the submission. And since then, he's gone 3-2 with 3 submission wins in all of his victories, losing his most recent fight to Petrosky. Now, Tresean Gore, he went 3-0 on the regional scene, comes through on the Ultimate Fighter, gets 2 wins on the Ultimate Fighter, but eventually faces Brian Battle, loses to Brian Battle, then he gets knocked out by Cody Brundage, picks up 2 guillotine wins in a row, and in his most recent fight, he got absolutely blasted and lost to Marco Tulio. The style of Rodolfo Vieira, physically strong BJJ submission grappler. Yeah, Rodolfo Vieira, like I said, he's one of the better grapplers in the middleweight division, or just in the UFC. Very physically strong, great for him for the middleweight division. It is a bit of a questionable gas tank though. After the first round, he tends to fade. I remember that fight with Hernandez, where like halfway through the first round, he was completely done. And he's very, very average on the feet. He mainly kind of just waits to shoot takedowns, and he's not got the best wrestling. It's when it gets to the ground that Rodolfo Vieira does well, but he's a bit of a fast starter. Tresean Gore, explosive, very explosive guy. Not really a great striker though. He's good at snatching up guillotines though. That's kind of his signature submission, but he has got pretty bad fight IQ in a lot of his fights. I'm going to go with Rodolfo Vieira to win this one by submission in the second round. Yeah, Tresean Gore, he just doesn't have the best fight IQ, and I feel like a guy like Rodolfo Vieira, he's got decent enough wrestling that he's going to be able to take the fight to the mat. It isn't like Tresean Gore is known for his really good wrestling. He's got, he's physically strong for the division. He's Tresean Gore. He has got a good guillotine, but I see Rodolfo Vieira picking up a submission. I just see him being a better fighter than Tresean Gore. I don't really see Gore posing too much of a threat to Vieira. He's not the best striker, is Tresean Gore, and I feel like Rodolfo Vieira's striking, we've kind of seen it improve over time, and I think obviously when it comes to the grappling between the two of them, I favour Rodolfo Vieira, and he is definitely one of the better submission artists in the middleweight division. So I think at some point in the fight, I'm going to go second round. Rodolfo Vieira picks up a submission over Tresean Gore, takes the fight to the mat, gets the submission. And yeah, I just don't really rate Tresean Gore too much. I think he's one of the worst middleweights on the roster. He got two signature guillotines, which ain't going to matter when you're facing Rodolfo Vieira. His fight IQ is piss poor. I'm going to pick Rodolfo Vieira to get this one done by submission in the second round. Then we've got Rinya Nakamura versus Nathan Fletcher. Rinya Nakamura had a background in Olympic wrestling back in Japan, went 4-0 on the regional scene. Then comes from Road to the UFC, which is essentially like the Asian Contender Series. Gets 2 finishes on Road to the UFC, and with the finale, him getting a brutal KO as well. And since then, he's gone 2-1 in the UFC, losing his most recent fight as a massive favourite of Amween Gaffarov at UFC 311. As he takes on Nathan Fletcher, who's a training partner of Paddy Pimblett. Nathan Fletcher had a really good run in the regional scene with a shit ton of submission wins, loses on the Ultimate Fighter, and then he goes and gets a finish in the finale of the Ultimate, well, his next fight on the Ultimate Fighter, which is technically his UFC debut, and then he lost his most recent fight with a very questionable decision to Keelan Lochran. The style of Rinya Nakamura, he's a solid control wrestler. That's kind of his style, but he clearly kind of fell in love with his hands a bit too much. He hits very hard on the feet, does Rinya Nakamura. He's kind of one of these wrestlers that have fallen in love with his hands too much, and he's kind of costed him because he doesn't really shoot takedowns as much, and he does mix up the wrestling and the striking well, but I don't think he's as good standing as he thinks he is. Again, he's one of these classic wrestlers who's fallen in love with his hands, and now he doesn't really shoot takedowns as much as he should. Nathan Fletcher, he's a BJJ grappler with good to back take, like a lot of those guys from a next-gen Liverpool tend to be. Very, very busy with the striking in the ground and pound. When he's got you in, when he's in mount, he's constantly firing ground and pound. I remember in that fight with Keelan Lochran, he had his back and was constantly trying to hit him in the face. And his takedown defense hasn't really shown to be too great, though. I don't really rate his anti-grappling too much. I'm going to go with Rinya Nakamura by decision. This is tough for Nathan Fletcher. For your second fight, or your third fight in the UFC to be against Rinya Nakamura when you're coming off a loss isn't the best. And Rinya Nakamura was definitely one of the better prospects coming into 2025. And I feel like I'm hoping that he'll learn from that fight with Amween Gaffarov that you need to shoot takedowns. I do rate Rinya Nakamura as the better fighter overall than Nathan Fletcher. I've seen being able to tag Nathan Fletcher on the feet because, like I said, his striking has definitely improved. It's just that he's fallen in love with it too much. And I think when it comes to grappling, I can see Rinya Nakamura completely smothering Nathan Fletcher across 15 minutes. Obviously, Fletcher's got the submission threat, but he couldn't really get it going with the grappling too much against Keelan Lochran apart from hanging on his back, and he ended up losing that fight. So I'm going to go Rinya Nakamura to win this one by decision. I think he's just better everywhere the fight goes. Maybe not the more technical striker out of the two of them. Maybe he doesn't have the best submission ability, but I think he's definitely got more threat on the feet, and he's got the wrestling to back it up. So I'm going to go Rinya Nakamura to win this one by decision, mainly with the wrestling, mixes it with the striking, and like I said, for Nathan Fletcher to go, with a very close fight with Keelan Lochran, to then go to what was one of the better prospects coming into 2025, it's a tough one for Fletcher. I'm going to go Rinya Nakamura to win this one by decision. Then we've got Danny Silva versus Kevin Vallejos. This is where the card starts to heat up. Danny Silva, he had a good run on the regional scene, gets a win on the Contender Series, and is so far 2-0 in the UFC with 2 decision wins as he takes on Kevin Vallejos. This guy had a massive run on the regional scene, becoming a multiple-time champion, and then he goes on the Contender Series against none other than Mr. Gene Silva, and he actually performed really well against Gene Silva, giving him one of the toughest fights in the UFC. Obviously, inevitably loses that fight to Gene Silva, so he gets 2 more finishes on the regional scene, comes back to the Contender Series, gets a KO, and just knocked out Sung Wung Choi in his UFC debut. The style of Danny Silva, he's a boxer with little to no defense, and he walks forward and throws bombs with no caution. Yeah, Danny Silva wants to walk forward, kind of swings on the feet, and he's kind of quite fun on the feet. He wants to walk forward and kind of scrap, but he hasn't really got any defense. He leaves his hands quite down. Doesn't care if he gets hit. Bit of a reckless style. Ken Vallejos is essentially Ilia Topuria 2.0 in the sense that he's got a very similar style to Topuria. He wants to press you against the cage with his boxing. He wants to back you up against the cage with his boxing. He wants to land a combination when you're against the cage and find the chin. Like I said, he's very similar to Topuria. Short, stocky guy with really good, powerful boxing. Once he's got you against the cage, he'll unload with a combination and end up putting you to sleep when he finds the shot. And he's, in my opinion, one of the best prospects in the UFC right now. I'm going to go with Kevin Vallejos by KO in the first round. I'm really bought on the hype of Kevin Vallejos. 15-0, with the vast majority of them being by finishes, and that only professional loss is to Silva, and even that was a close fight. I do believe that Kevin Vallejos is one of the better prospects in this division, and he will be in the top 15 within a few years, and I feel like this is a very favourable matchup for Kevin Vallejos. Silva, he's got a bit of a scrappy style, and he gets hit a lot. You don't want to be getting hit a lot by Kevin Vallejos, who clearly packs a punch. I think Kevin Vallejos is going to do what he normally does. Backs Silva against the cage. And might not even have to do that, because I think Silva might be the guy walking forward, and eventually he's going to clip Silva, land on the chin, and put him out cold. I think Kevin Vallejos is going to get another beautiful highlight reel. And like I said, I'm bought on the hype of Kevin Vallejos. Performed really well. 15-1 with the only loss being to Silva. And Silva hasn't really been putting the stamp on these wins. Like the fight with Josh Cooleybow was a bit closer than it should have been. He hasn't got any finishes in the UFC so far. Kind of, does well getting hit. I think Kevin Vallejos is going to starch him. Kevin Vallejos by KO in the first round. Then we've got Karol Rosa versus Nora Cornolle. Karol Rosa had a pretty good run in the regional scene, becoming a champion, and so far she's essentially been a bit of a win-loss fighter in the UFC, but she has had a really good fight with Irene Aldana, which was one of the best women MMA fights of 2023 at UFC 296, as she takes on Nora Cornolle, who lost her debut, her professional debut, to Jacqueline Cavalcanti, which you're going to have to note, and then she ends up going on a big run in the regional scene, with the vast majority of them all of them being by finish, then goes 2-0 in the UFC, finishing Melissa Mullins, and then loses again to Jacqueline Cavalcanti, who's the only woman to ever beat Nora Cornolle, and since then she had a good finish in the most recent fight over Haley Cowan. The style of Karol Rosa, she's a pretty good volume striker on the feet, is Karol Rosa. She gets going with the volume. She does tend to hold back a bit, and she has got little to bad athleticism. Like, her athleticism for the division is quite bad, a bit ploddy for a women fighter, and it kind of tends to hold back a little bit too much. Nora Cornolle, she's a kickboxer, and she tends to have quite a bit of pop in her shots, does Nora Cornolle. She hits quite hard on the feet. Like I said, finished Melissa Mullins, was absolutely lighting up Haley Cowan on the feet. Her wrestling defense is quite questionable, though. She can be taken down, and obviously her discipline, because she's missed weight like two or three different times in the UFC, but she does have different Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I'm going to go with Nora Cornolle to win this one by decision. Nora Cornolle, if she can get her weight in check, she's one of the better up-and-coming women MMA fighters. Like I said, I'm really impressed with the striking of Nora Cornolle. It clearly has quite a bit of pop in her shots, and her kickboxing is actually pretty clean. And Karol Rosa, I just think she's too hesitant. She waits too much. She's inconsistent. She's always she's not really the hardest to hit. Her athleticism is quite bad for the division. I see Nora Cornolle kind of picking apart Karol Rosa across 15 minutes, potentially even getting a late finish, but I think picking a women MMA fight's winning finish is quite tough to do. So I'm going to go Nora Cornolle by decision. Picks apart Karol Rosa, gets the decision win, 30-27. And like I said, her only professional losses have both been to Cavalcanti. And even in that fight with Cavalcanti, she wasn't getting dominated. So I'm going to go with Nora Cornolle, and that win over Jocelyn Edwards as well is edging quite well. So Nora Cornolle by decision. Hopefully she can weigh in on the right way, because she's, like I said, one of the better women MMA fighters in this division. Good striking, good pop in her shots, decent submission ability too. Nora Cornolle by decision. Then we've got the Battle of the Yunks, Neil Magny versus Zaleksi de Santos. Zaleksi de Santos had a big run in the regional scene, becoming a champion, lost his UFC debut to Nicholas Dalby, then goes on quite a big winning streak, including knocking out Sean Strickland with a spinning hook kick. He then faces Li Jingliang, gets knocked out by Li Jingliang, then goes 3-1 with a really good win over Benoit Saint-Denis in Saint-Denis' debut, and since then, after that, he ends up drawing with Renat Fakhretdinov, which could have been a win, losing to Randy Brown, finishing Zachary Scroggin, and losing his most recent fight to Chidi Najkwani by finish, as he takes on Neil Magny, who had a good run in the regional scene, comes through on the Ultimate Fighter where he wins the tournament, but he goes 3-0 in the tournament, and then loses in the finale, getting knocked out. He then goes 1-2 in the UFC, puts together quite a good winning streak until he runs into Damian Maia, gets finished by Damian Maia, and since then, he has been the best gatekeeper in the UFC, where every single time he faces an up-and-coming guy, he does well against them, or most of the time, apart from recently, and every other time he gets a step up, he loses. And his most recent fight took on Carlos Prates, and he got knocked out brutally by Carlos Prates in the main event last year. The style of Neil Magny, he's well-rounded, but not elite anywhere. Neil Magny can do everything. He can submit, he can wrestle, he can strike, he just isn't elite anywhere. He's a bit of a volume striker, though, with occasional takedowns. No danger, though. He hasn't got any danger of getting a finish on the feet, but he's a bit of a volume striker with occasional takedowns, and he is washed as fuck. Yeah, he's been in the UFC for a long time. His performances are starting to get more stale. He's been looking bad in more of his performances. Very, very washed. Zaleski de Santos, he used to be a really athletic kickboxer, did Zaleski de Santos, but he's kind of worn down now due to age. As he's got older, you can kind of tell that the kickboxing's got a little bit worse, and he's dangerous across 15 minutes. You know, he's a very dangerous guy, is Zaleski de Santos with the kickboxing. as he just kind of showed against Zachary Scroggin a couple of fights ago, even though it was a bit of a layup for Zaleksi de Santos. I'm going to go with Zaleksi de Santos to win this one by decision. I see this fight taking place primarily on the feet. Zaleksi de Santos hasn't got that bad anti-grappling. We kind of saw that in the fight with Rinya. And when it comes to the two of them, Zaleksi de Santos is the better striker. Neil Magny, he's getting worse with every performance. He's been finished in his last 2 fights, and he was looking bad in that fight with Mike Mallet as well on the feet. I see Zaleksi de Santos winning this one pretty comfortably. He's the better kickboxer. And even though they're both past their prime, past their sell-by date, I think Zaleksi de Santos has definitely been looking more dangerous with his more recent performances. So I'm going to go Zaleski de Santos by decision. I see him outpointing Neil Magny, landing the bigger shots, the more impactful shots. Maybe not having the higher output, but I just think Zaleski de Santos, better kickboxer, outstrikes Magny across 15 minutes. I'm going to go Zaleski de Santos by decision. And you look at Neil Magny's past couple of wins. Mike Mallet, who was getting dominated until the last minute. Phil Raw isn't that impressive of a win, really, is it? So I'm going to go Zaleski de Santos. Gets this one done by decision. Just outstrikes Neil Magny. Then we've got Esteban Ribovics versus Elvis Brenner. This is one of the fights on this card. I'm like, why the fuck is this in the Apex? Because this genuinely has like fight of the year potential. Esteban Ribovics, massive run in the regional scene with a 100% finishing rate, becoming a champion. Gets a good finish on the Contender Series. Loses in his UFC debut. Since then, goes 2-0 with a really brutal KO over Terrence McKinney. And then at UFC 306, he fought Daniel Zellaba and had one of the greatest fights, honestly, I've ever seen. I think that was the greatest fight of 2024 at UFC 306 in the Safari against Daniel Zellaba. And he lost his last fight to Nasrat Haqparast in quite a controversial loss. Going to be taking on Elvis Brenner, who had a big run in the regional scene, becoming a champion too. He went 3-0 in his first 3 fights in the UFC with 2 pretty brutal finishes. He then loses to Mitabek Robine in his most recent fight, got finished by Yoel Alvarez in his most recent fight. The style of Esteban Ribovics, he's a walk-forward, high-output kickboxer who looks to throw down and enter a fight of the night. If there was a fighter that was built for fight of the night, it's Esteban Ribovics. He walks forward, he pressures people, high output on the feet, looks to throw down and scrap, and that's why he's had so many good scraps in the UFC. He's also got an amazing chin, which helps him too. He's been caught by many big shots, like in the fight with Daniel Zellaba, and he's just been able to tank them, even in his most recent fight against Nasrat Haqparast. And he's just a fun-ass guy. He's one of the most entertaining unranked lightweights on the roster, which again makes me question why they've stuck this fight in the Apex. Elvis Brenner, he's a very powerful boxer with wrestling in the back pocket. Yeah, he's very, very powerful on the feet. He's Elvis Brenner. He has got wrestling in the back pocket. And again, similar to Esteban Ribovics, he doesn't really mind throwing down and engaging in a scrap. He's a bit more of a scrappy fighter, so I'm expecting big things from this fight. But I'm going to go with Esteban Ribovics to win this one by TKO in the 3rd round. Yeah, Elvis Brenner's kind of been getting a murderer's raw at 155. To go from Mitabek Robine to Yoel Alvarez to Elvis Brenner, it's quite a tough run. I just think Esteban Ribovics, I think he's one of the best unranked dudes in this division, and I do see him being a much better guy on the feet than Elvis Brenner. He's got much higher output than Elvis Brenner. I think he's a lot more dangerous than Elvis Brenner. And Elvis Brenner kind of does well when he's able to, you know, land a massive shot on these other opponents, but I don't know how much that's going to help him when he's facing Esteban Ribovics, who's known for having a good chin, known for having a good scrap. So I see Ribovics getting a late finish, overwhelming Elvis Brenner with the striking, clipping him with a big shot in the 3rd round and getting the job done. And he should have beaten Nasrat Haqparast in my opinion. I thought he got the good win over Nasrat Haqparast and obviously got that win in that scrap with Daniel Zellaba. So I'm going to go with Ribovics to win this one by TKO in the 3rd round. Really tough fight for Elvis Brenner. I don't see him landing the big shot on Ribovics, and if he does, I think Ribovics has done enough to tank it. So I'm going to go with Ribovics by TKO in the 3rd round, but this should be an absolute scrap. You know, this has fight of the night, even potentially like fight of the month written all over it, which again, I'm confused why they've stuck this in the Apex. It should be a scrap, but I just favour Ribovics. He's got more momentum as it is right now. He's the better kickboxer, higher output, probably the more dangerous guy too. And we've got Esteban Ribovics by TKO in the 3rd round. Then we have another scrap in the lightweight division. Chris Duncan against Mateusz Rembecki. Now, Chris Duncan had an undefeated run in the regional scene with a 100% finishing rate. Gets knocked out on the Contender Series. Then he gets a win in the regional scene, comes back to the Contender Series where he delivers a brutal KO. And then he goes over to American Top Team. And since that, well, after that, he goes 2-0 in the UFC, gets submitted by Manuel Torres. And then in his most recent 2 fights, he submitted Balaji and got a good submission win in his most recent fight against Jordan Vucenic. As he takes on Mateusz Rembecki, who had a massive run on the regional scene, becoming a multiple champion, gets a good finish on the Contender Series, goes 3-0 for his first 3 fights in the UFC with 2 good finishes as one of the better 155 prospects. Then he loses to Diego Ferreira, gets absolutely battered by Diego Ferreira, and then in his most recent fight, he had another fight of the year contender against Mitabek Robine, where he ended up winning that fight back in October. The style of Chris Duncan, he's a boxer boxing-heavy approach on the feet, but he's not particularly a great striker. When he is standing, he's got a decent boxing. He is pretty powerful on the feet, although he isn't one of the best strikers at 155. And he's kind of forte is his submission ability. He's got really good submission ability and ground game, which he's kind of progressed as he's, you know, been working at American Top Team. Matej Rumbetski is a reckless, powerful striker with bad defense, but better offense. Yeah, his defense isn't great, Rumbetski. We saw it in the fight with Diego Vieira, but he's just reckless, he's powerful, and he's got better offense than Chris Duncan. He has submissions in his arsenal. He doesn't particularly go for submissions, but he does have submissions in his arsenal, and he's essentially just a power cube. Walks forward, looks to scrap, hits hard, can be hit. Very vulnerable guy, but he's one of the more entertaining dudes at 155, which again, it has me questioning why they've stuck this fight on an Apex card. But I'm going to go with Matej Rumbetski to win this one by decision. This is a big step up for Chris Duncan, and I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about Chris Duncan because he hasn't really got any great wins in the UFC so far. Jordan Vucenic is 0-2 in the UFC, just been cut. Blasziok isn't great either. He got submitted by Manuel Torres. Whereas Rumbetski looked really good in the fight with Mita Groba. He did look terrible in the fight with Diego Vieira, but I think stylistically, this is a favourable matchup for Rumbetski. I see him keeping this fight standing and just completely overworking Chris Duncan. Chris Duncan didn't look particularly amazing on the fight, on the feet, with Jordan Vucenic, who's more of a grappler. And I feel like when you put him in there with a reckless, dangerous guy like Matej Rumbetski, I just see him completely overwhelming Chris Duncan on the feet. Obviously, Chris Duncan's going to try to take the fight to the mat, but it isn't like Rumbetski's got bad grappling. He has submissions in his back pocket. So I'm going to go Rumbetski to win this one by a pretty dominant decision, brutalizing Chris Duncan on the feet. But again, it could be a bit of a scrap. Chris Duncan's always willing to throw down. He's got the grappling in the back pocket. Should be a fun fight. But I rate Matej Rumbetski's opponents more. I rate his style more. I think Rumbetski gets this job done by decision. And then we've got the main event, Tatsuro Taira against Hyun Sung Park on short notice. Now, Hyun Sung Park, I think he's the most underrated flyweight prospect there is right now. He went 5-0 on the regional scene, becoming a champion, then goes over to the road to the UFC, gets two brutal finishes, not brutal, but gets two finishes on road to the UFC, and then gets a submission win in his UFC debut, a TKO in his next fight in the UFC, and a submission win in his most recent fight in the UFC to go 10-0 against Carlos Hernandez, as he takes on Tatsuro Taira, who had a big run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. And after that, went quite a big run in the UFC with 3 submissions, as he was three finishes, as he was one of the UFC's better prospects at flyweight. And then he takes on Alex Perez in the main event, finishes Alex Perez even though it was a bit of an injury, and then main event against Brandon Royval, and then loses to Brandon Royval in a pretty close fight late last year. The style of Tatsuro Taira, he's got elite Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. His submission ability and ability to take positions to the next level, and he kind of showcased this in the Alex Perez fight. He's got really good submission ability, and he's just overall grappling seems to be pretty good. He's able to take the back quite comfortably. He's able to initiate ground game, initiate takedowns quite good as well. Big fan of Tatsuro Taira's grappling. He's got good pace and stamina as well, which he showed in the fight with Royval. That was a scrap across 25 minutes, and he did well. His stand-up is pretty average. He's not a great striker, but he's not awful on the feet. He has got pretty average stand-up. Now, Hyun Sung Park, this guy's very dangerous. The vast majority of his wins coming by way of finish. He wants to take you down, get you against the cage and bully you with his boxing. He wants to press you against the cage, rip to the body, rip to the head with boxing. And he also happens to have great wrestling and BJJ on top of it. And he's kind of got the full package of Hyun Sung Park. He can strike, he can wrestle, he can grapple, he can do everything, which is why I actually think this is a better replacement for Iber Albazi. But I'm going to go with Tatsuro Taira to win this one by decision. Yeah, I'm still kind of bought on the hype of Tatsuro Taira. Very, very young for this division, and this is on short notice for Hyun Sung Park. Obviously, we're supposed to fight against Steve Erceg, but even that was on short notice. This is on even shorter notice against Tatsuro Taira, and I just see Taira doing better with the grappling. I see him initiating more of the grappling. I've seen a lot more from Tatsuro Taira, and like I said, I think he's one of the better grapplers in this division. Now, I will say this about Hyun Sung Park. He hasn't really beaten any decent names so far. He also beat Carlos Hernandez, who Tatsuro Taira also beat, and I guess he was able to get the finish over Carlos Hernandez. I don't know. I just favour Tatsuro Taira a lot more with the grappling, and we're still kind of untested. It's Hyun Sung Park. It's on short notice. Again, there's not really any logical reason I can pick Taira to win this fight because it's a tough one. Hyun Sung Park's probably got the more dangerous striking, and he has got ground game too, but I'm hoping that Tatsuro Taira is going to pull through. He looked good against Royval as well, did Tatsuro Taira. Like, he was able to land takedowns and make it a scrap with Royval, and the only other guy who's really been able to do that with the grappling too is Pantoja himself. So I'm still kind of, I don't look at that Royval loss as too much of a hype kill for Tatsuro Taira. So I'm going to pick him to win this one by decision. Implements the grappling, does well across 25 minutes, and I do think he's probably more suited for 25 minutes. The fact that he's gone 25 minutes before with Royval, He's had a full training camp for this one, and this is Hyun Sung Park's 4th fight in the UFC in his first 25-minute fight, so I'm going to pick Taira to win this one by decision, but it should be a fun fight, and like I said, I think this is a lot tougher for Tatsuro Taira than Merab Bashi. But those are my picks for UFC Fight Night Park versus Taira. Let me know if you agree, disagree, and if you have any picks you're on, and thank you for watching.